Welcome back, everybody, to Cool's Interviews. Today, we're probably going to go off in a host of different topics because luckily our guest today is very knowledgeable in a bunch of different fields, expertise. There's some books, YouTube videos, and different interviews that we all listen to try to get ready. And we think you guys are going to enjoy it. And Rita, thank you for joining us. Our guest today, Dr. Rita Louise. Now, for people that may not know you, do you want to just give a quick little background? And
my day job is I work as a medical intuitive counselor, and energy medicine practitioner. I have a degree in naturopathy, which is working with herbs and supplements and alternative health practices, and a PhD in natural health counseling. So people have issues, whether they're physical issues, emotional issues, spiritual issues, they have attached entities. My office is the land of weird, and those are the people that come to me. And that's my day job. But I'm releasing my seventh book at this point, and I go through these different cycles where I'm doing a lot of writing a lot of articles, producing videos, kind of depending on what's floating my boat at that particular time, which is why I have just so much weird stuff, because the core is I do session work. But then there's what interests me, which is all kinds of stuff, from ghosts to ancient mysteries to ancient aliens. I want to say I'm a long-term conspiracy theorist, before it went into this whole political realm, which took it, in my opinion, way off course. Um, Stuff talking about trauma, personal relationships, energetic dynamics. There is probably not a whole lot I can't talk to you about. Fixing your car, how to mud and tape walls, I
yeah, no, and I totally get the conspiracy theory stuff. Me and Sam and one of our other group members, Alan, actually used to do a show, Curses, Coincidences, and Conspiracies, and talk about different conspiracy theories. But anymore, it seems like everything's a conspiracy, which kind of makes it not as fun, I think, anymore.
but it seems like it's only a conspiracy if there's a political box around it. Nobody's
Mhm.
talking about like UFOs anymore, or they're not talking about ancient mysteries. Like, it's become very boring and humdrum versus, I mean, because I had a podcast and it was just energy radio. And so that was like a mainstay of the show, was talking ancient mysteries, conspiracy theories, the whole Sandy Hook thing and 9/11 and whatever. And now it's like, we're second class conspiracy theorists now.
Right. Right. I know the ancient mysteries too is something I think it's gotten a bigger following as of late. And so maybe that's why it's not so conspiratorial, if we would say. Because I
Hmm.
know Atlantis, there's like Bright Insight has done some stuff. Like all these people are given all these theories and I guess pretty good evidence to different ideas of where it could be. And so now people are like, well, it's not as fun, perhaps. I don't know. I mean, what's your take on that? Like, is there an ancient mystery that most enthralls you, like gets your brain going the most?
I really like looking. So, where I really come into that whole ancient mystery, ancient alien thing is looking at the mythology, and looking at the comparative stories that you find one culture to the other. So that's kind of my guiding post is these people are talking about this. There's a similar story here. There's a similar story here. And I found one in Australia, which is always my outlier. If I can find it in Australia or in the Americas, you really know you have something that's part of this global myth. And I find it interesting because I, okay, this is going to sound really bad, but I just did this and it's coming out soon for Gaia, Ancient Civilization, number 5. I was in number 4, but I'm in number 5. And they did this whole 10-part series on Atlantis and Lemuria, and I'm sorry, but I just can't own Atlantis. I can own Lemuria more because there's actually, to my surprise, in doing the research for the show, there was more physical evidence and there was more mythological evidence. Where Atlantis, there's Plato,
Hmm.
and that's it. And one source, not buying it, one source.
Right. And it's Plato's story is supposedly the story he heard from someone else, and it's over 100 years old. And, like you said in your book, it's like a game of telephone, right?
Well, that's what they want you to believe. So I like to use the example, so I have to sit here and kind of like position this. So one of the things that you find, and I'm going to use Native American culture, is you see, they'll carve different petroglyphs. And I went to this one site in New Mexico, and there was this guy talking about the location because kind of in this semicircle were the little individual petroglyphs. And he said, but each one points to a different piece of the story. And so the storyteller would go around this circle sharing the myth about this land. So with that said, so I'm going to throw out a couple of statements and you tell me who I'm talking about because this is a person.
Okay, I'll
Okay.
try my best.
Okay. So this is an older gentleman. He has white hair and a big white beard. He wears a red suit. Santa.
Jolly Saint Nick, yeah.
That's right. So I gave you 3 little baby clues and you knew who it was. But the story of Santa goes back hundreds of years. But with that one image in our mind, we know the whole story. We know he's
Mhm.
married. We know if you want to see him, what the best time to catch him. We know his mode of transportation. We know who he hangs out with. We know all of this information about him. And that same narrative has followed along throughout time. And so in the mythic record, we have a very similar thing. They talk about and share stories that are very important. And so the minor details might change, but there's that core nugget that stays the same culture to culture, and generation to generation to generation.
Yeah, and I know one that came up in your book, Man Made. So any viewers, listeners, go get that book, read it,
Well,
listen.
actually, use ET Chronicles because a publisher got it,
Hmm.
but that's what you can get on Amazon. If you buy it from me directly, you can get Man Made, which has a way better cover and spelling mistakes. So those are priceless.
More authentic, right?
That's right.
Yeah, but you use the flood myth and how it actually isn't
Hmm.
just in one story, i.e., the Bible, but it's actually in different cultures and stuff. You want to kind of go into that a little bit?
Right. And so when I was writing that book, again, I was looking for parallels. And so the most consistent story we have that is still in our repertoire is the flood story. The second most common story we have is how we got fire, which obviously predates everything because that's like the beginning of civilization. But anyway, but the Noah story, when you take so they say there are over 500 different flood narratives from around the world, but when you start investigating them, what you find out is they're pretty much all the same. And so the parallel I would give is, when they had Hurricane Katrina, the people that survived that storm or that hurricane, that's their flood story, and they got choppered out and brought and, the boats and whatever. But if you were in Southeast Asia where there was a tsunami, it would be a totally different story. And the population would be telling a very different narrative of what happened. It wasn't a hurricane, it was a tidal wave. Very different story. But when you look at the flood narrative, it consolidated down literally to like one paragraph. There was a pious, virtuous, or honorable man who is warned of an impending flood. He builds a boat, an ark. They climb a tree, they get on a leaf, they make a canoe, or they climb to the top of a mountain. And he survives with his sister. Sometimes there's an old man. Sometimes a bird or an animal is released, a lot of times a bird, to let them know that the water has receded. And in a number of stories, there are animals involved that are saved. but not consistent. So, like, one of my personal favorites, I think it came out of Peru, which tells about these two brothers who are warned of the flood by a llama, a talking llama. And the llama tells them to take their families and go to the top of the mountain. And so they go to the top of the mountain. And as the waters rise, the mountain rises. And as the waters recede, the mountain recedes again. And so there are some people go, yeah, but they went on a mountain. But if you think about it, where did Noah's Ark land?
On the
On a
mountain.
mountain. So even though there's a little discrepancy, a little that telephone thing going on, you still have a number of the same components. Okay, so I'm gonna like throw in a little extra piece. One of the things that I found interesting, because in the Noah story, they talk about he released the dove and the dove brought back the olive branch and blah, blah, blah. And so my my initial thought was, when you looked at flood narratives that were in the Middle East, they would all kind of talk about this bird or some animal, raven, being released and letting them know. But that wasn't what I found. It's like that was a kind of isolated Middle Eastern story, and other ones didn't, no bird, or they let a lion, a jaguar out, or whatever. But in that Peru story, they had a bird. And it's like, but those elements, those pieces of the story were important to the people. And, those are the things you told around the fire. So by the time you were 10 years old, you knew all the stories. It's like knowing all the words to at least the first verse of Jingle Bells,
Right.
or Silent Night. You'd know it, and you only hear it. Well, I mean, nowadays from October through January. But but back in the day, you didn't hear it all the time, but you still ended up knowing the words.
Right. And you didn't hear like a gazillion different versions of Jingle Bells.
Right.
Me, yeah, me and Sam worked retail for quite a bit, and
Yeah.
we heard as many different versions of Rudolph as I think I could have possibly imagined.
Really.
Yeah.
Rudolph, All I Want for Christmas, like all of the Christmas songs have been
Heavy
like,
metal, like screamo, classical, country, like.
But they all had the same words.
Mhm.
oh yeah, they didn't
They
change
just had a variation on. I mean, it's not like Winter Wonderland and my personal favorite, walking around in women's underwear, is my personal favorite variation. Oh, sorry.
I mean, no worries.
No, uh, no, you were kind of talking about those stories that people told around, like, be it campfires or their family hut or whatever. I mean, this is very integral, especially in a time well before anything that we have today. You really just had those verbal stories. And this is something you see with, is it the Mayans, where they think, oh, what's his name? Or is it the, oh, he comes over, he has the beard. The Spaniards come over, but
Hmm.
it's their downfall. But it's because he looked like their myth, right?
So well, we'll say in Aztec culture. Yeah, but you also find that again in South America. When they describe their gods, they are Caucasian and they have beards. And so one of the things about South America is, or Native Americans, is that they don't really have facial hair. So to have a depiction of somebody that is basically white and has a full beard, that's outside of their cultural norm, and that was the god. So yeah, so when the Spaniards came, there were all these white guys with beards, and they thought that it was the gods that had come to them.
Right. Yeah, it's so crazy to think, like, and it's weird too cuz like you have all these stories, right? And people that aren't connected really, not like today. But again with the similarities, and what does that say about people before that time? Like how did they get to where they are? Is it just something that we always tell, or is there something in our lifetime do you think that happened? Like, is there a
Yeah.
true flood, or do you think it was just a myth?
So I'm going to answer it in a different way.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So when you look at the body of myth, there is the flood story. And I'm going to use the biblical analogy, and then like the Tower of Babel, where everyone gets their own language and they disperse. And there is a hard line, bam, right there. And when you look at the stories that precede it, there is a level of consistency that is unreal. But when you go past it, you start moving into more cultural myths and cultural stories that are isolated to the individual groups. But there's also something else that happens in that shift. In the earlier stories, they are reflected like, I'm a god, you're a god, we're hanging out, we're doing these cool things, we're throwing lightning, and you're part of the god clan, because they're kind of written, I don't want to say first person, but you are part of the god group. But once you pass that flood story, the narrative changes. And see, this is where I think it gets interesting. And now we are here and God is up there. And it becomes not the stories of the gods anymore, but our stories in relationship to the gods. So that whole dynamic changes at that point in time. And why that is, I don't know, but it just adds to my belief that we were programmed with this belief that there's somebody up there that we're supposed to pay homage to. I mean, where would we come up with that? Why would we make that up? Why would we make ourselves subservient to some invisible thing, thousands and thousands of years ago?
Yeah, no, I was actually thinking about that today because, it's weird that no matter where you're from, there's some sort of God, no matter what religion, even if these cultures that are still kind of remote in the Amazons or in Asia and stuff, they still believe in gods. What
Hmm.
makes us think that? That is a very interesting question. Do you think that's just like a level of consciousness? Like once you get there, is that something that evolves? Or like you said, is it programmed within us?
Well, I mean, I think it's definitely programmed within the family unit within us, that this is reality, and I think as people become more aware, um, trying to think if it was in that book. So in the kind of follow-up book to the ET Chronicles book, I have a book called Stepping Out of Eden, and I kind of address that piece there. Um, and I'll just say this is my belief. I believe that there was a race of extraterrestrials that came and genetically engineered humanity back, and not 100,000 years ago, because our first myth that has survived is the gods teaching man how to use fire. And that was minimally 750,000 years ago, back with Neanderthal man. So not no 100,000, not no 40,000, bam, way back then. And so I believe that there was Giorgio Zuccolo says, there's the big G God and the little G God, and the big G God is that invisible dude. And then there's the little G gods that we write about in myth, which are, in my opinion, these physical beings that we interacted with in our deep history. However, there's a little however, but then there are these higher level, higher vibrating beings that people also interact with that are non-corporeal, and so when people go into a deep trance or they do ayahuasca or they, like the Native Americans, they would burn tobacco and dance around and do all of this stuff to raise their awareness and go into this ecstatic state. And they would interact with these gods, and these gods would give them information as well. So you can't totally discount that supernatural, spiritual aspect of, and I'm air quoting, God. Um, but I think the one that we have in myth the majority of the time, were corporeal beings that at some point in time we interacted with. Hard to genetically engineer stuff if you don't have a body.
Right. Yeah, no, we actually talked recently to an author, Kim Goodsword, where he was talking about Prometheus, the film Prometheus,
Hmm.
where and he said that might be kind of how it happened, where you had these alien beings come to Earth and engineer life as we know it. Are you kind of saying it would be like that, or there was already life and they came here, like you said, the Neanderthals and early like Homo erectus maybe, and they geared stuff that way?
There are people that are with the whole panspermia theory and whatever, and it's really hard to make commentary on
Mhm.
that because there's no stories tied to it. But where the stories come in and where we can find, I'm going to say, evidence in the archaeological record to support it. So this was kind of the line, and this is totally in that Stepping Out of Eden book. So the line that I put in there was, okay, in the biblical narrative, there's in those days, the Nephilim walked the earth, and then the sons of God mated with the daughters of men, and their offspring were the Geborm, not the giants, but the men of wisdom. And so in cultures around the world, we have these demigods. They're half man, half gods. So, and at first, in my research, I kind of dismissed that story, even though it's pre-flood, but I dismissed it because I couldn't find a parallel. Couldn't. And then I did. And it came out of the Ramayana, where it talks about, I mean, the Ramayana is this whole long story, but Rama, at the end of the book, is going to fight a war against the demon god of Lanka, and he needs troops. But Vishnu knew that he was going to fight this war. So, generations before that, he sends all the gods down to mate with the apes and bears. And so, their offspring were these creatures called the Vinara, which were half man, half ape, that had advanced skills. So if your father was the god of wind, then you could leap long distances. Or if your father was the god in charge of engineering and architecture, then you had these engineering abilities. And so when you sit there and you look at where there is this very big shift between kind of being more animal like and having more culture, you find that at Homo erectus. And there's just so much change that happens at that point in time. It's like, obviously they're walking upright and they have divergent toes, but by that time they lost all their body hair. They had art, they had culture. There's evidence that they could somewhat work with fire. They had herbs. They have Neanderthals that they looked at their dentition and found herbs that were um, like a penicillin type antibiotic herb. So there was advanced knowledge. They started burial customs during that period. And they lived in social groups. And so the group before that, which was Homo habilis, if I'm not mistaken, didn't have all of that. But in Neanderthal, there's like a really kind of clean break in there, the advent of modern man.
Yeah, no, it's interesting too, because when you were talking about the powers of like the offspring representing the gods, I'm Greek, so it's I think back to like the Greek mythology and the Greek gods and Zeus and
Hmm.
Heracles and Mount Vesuvius. Like so obviously that's picked a little bit from that story probably, right?
Hmm. Well, and that's why I sit there and go, there are a lot of stories of demigods
Hmm.
that you find, but they don't necessarily talk about this mass colloidus act. It's usually like one god here and one god there doing something, but we don't know if that was just, if Zeus was just the one in charge of having this whole thing happen, but he also had like 8 mixed kids. So so who knows?
As we keep building up into the modern day, you see like pyramids and all this stuff where some people say they're religious, some people say they were built to harness electricity. Like, where do you kind of stand on that point?
I stand on the point of we don't know. And you can sit there and say whatever you want until you can find something a bit more definitive other than, well, this is my opinion. And because it's my opinion, it's true, then I have an issue. I'll
Right.
give you an example. So I wrote a piece about the burying of Göbekli Tepe
Okay.
and the reason why they buried it. Because one of the things, in addition to the myth, I'm really interested in the cultural experience and what are people thinking. And so during that period of time when Göbekli Tepe existed, they really lived in a mind state of taboo. If I do this, that's bad. These spirits are going to come and get me, or I'm going to go to hell, or, something's going to happen and it's going to be taboo. And you can have taboos that are too blessed, so if you are a person and the king used this pen and he puts it down and I picked it up, but since it's the king's pen and it's blessed, now I'm tabooed because I shouldn't have touched it because it's a holy object. So it can be so vile or so holy that you get the taboo. So my premise was that the reason they buried Göbekli Tepe was that land was so sacred, aka like maybe there was an extraterrestrial living there and it was so sacred they had to bury it, because if someone inadvertently picked up a rock from Göbekli Tepe and put it into another location, now that other location would be tabooed because it just stayed with it for forever, which makes a whole lot more sense to me than, oh, well, they were burying it for posterity's sake, or we could find it thousands of years later. And I'm like, no, there has to be something that scared the crap out of them to make them want to do that. And having it be taboo and their grandchildren walking by and going, oh, look at this rock, I'm going to throw it. But it's a taboo rock.
Right.
That would be bad.
Right.
And
And it's not
burying
as
and burying stuff, burning stuff, and throwing it into the ocean were the three primary ways of getting rid of tabooed items.
yeah, and it's not a small area to just bury. Göbekli Tepe is a lot bigger
It's
than I think people think of it.
huge.
Yeah.
It's like 16 acres. It's huge.
Yeah, dwarf Stonehenge, and I mean not that Stonehenge that we see is big because I think there's some of it underground, but Göbekli Tepe is just a whole nother level. I would love to visit it. I know it's really hard right now to get there and visit it though.
Mm-hmm. But people come out with these theories about, well, it was this and well, it was that. And it's like, hey, you don't know. Don't know.
Right. Well, and
Don't
it's like
know.
you take some of our skyscrapers, and if they were able to last, not that I think they were, 2,000 years from now, people would be like, oh, how did they build that? Well, must have been something else. What was it for? It's a monument. They wouldn't know that people are just typing computers and stuff. So I think that's the
I'm
interesting part too.
I wrote an article because I don't know, I was on a site, I think it was like Graham Hancock's, and they posted one of my pieces on there. So of course I get the like rant, 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 rant people, and I'm like, you don't know. I go, so 5,000 years from now, an archaeologist in St. Louis is digging through a garbage heap and he finds this plastic cup and it has the golden arch on it. And he's like, oh, it's the god of the golden arch. And then they find one with this woman and it says Wendy. It's like, oh, and it's the goddess Wendy. I mean, come on. I mean, that's kind of to me, what they say now, and it's not true. It's just speculation. So,
Right. Well, especially that so long ago. I mean, nothing outside of the stones have survived. So, I mean, how, even if they were to write it on some type of paper, it's going to disintegrate. Like, I don't know how you'd, unless we can time travel, which I know is a conspiracy theory. Maybe people have already time traveled.
mhm.
But without that, how are we going to ever know,
Yeah, because I think I was doing some research on tattooing, so there's some speculative stuff based on tattooing tools that they have found in caves, but I think the oldest tattoo goes back, well, that, what's his name? I want to say Ozzy, but maybe it is Ozzy, but that guy that they found buried in the snow, he had tattoos on him, and I think that he was like 3500 BC, something like that, which is like the oldest intact tattoo that they've ever found. And there's a couple of other ones that are pretty old, but, so we really don't know how far back tattooing goes, because that's our only or our first real solid piece of evidence.
Well, and I know you kind of use tattoos too to showcase like the changing stereotypes, like what's good and what's frowned upon. It's frowned upon then, it's
Wow,
okay
you
now.
actually like freaking read this book.
I did, yeah. Yeah, no, I read it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, but our cultural view and our cultural belief changes based on what's going on socially. So, I mean, I'm like looking at you guys, how old you are. So I just remember when I was a kid, you would see some guy with a tattoo on his arm, and, the assumption was they were unsavory or they were in the military. That was the other possible thing, but you still kind of looked at them like, oh, you got a tattoo. And now, I mean, I'm going to say this out loud. My daughter-in-law has a bunch of tattoos, and I'm just like, okay, whatever, and they're just seen as socially acceptable.
right. Well, you can use that for different things. Like me and Sam do paranormal, obviously on the channel, and we ghost hunt. It's kind of a topic that sometimes is okay in history. People open, especially native cultures, have lots of spirituality. Early times in Europe and even America, it's okay. And then it becomes a taboo. Don't talk about it. It's not real. And then it's kind of in that state again where it's okay to talk about it.
Hmm.
Like, so is it just like another thing? Like, is there more to it, or is it energy that creates that? Is it ego? Like, what makes certain
Do you
things?
really want my opinion on that?
Yes.
So when I started writing the E.T. Chronicles book, I thought I was writing this panacea that would be of interest to everyone, talking about these, because if you read the book, I don't think I say alien in it at all. I think it's on the book cover, but I don't think I just say the gods. And I thought it would be of interest to everyone. However, if you go to India, they talk about extraterrestrials. If you go to Australia, they talk about the sky people. If you go to the Americas, they talk about the sky people. So it's only in the Judeo-Christian view of the world that all of it got taken away. And I say this in a very loving way, but the stories that are in the early part of the Bible are very consistent with the mythic record that you find around the world, with one exception. Somebody took this 5-gallon bucket of whiteout and whited out most of the stories that you find around the world, because you can't have Zeus fighting Kronos because there's only one God. So you have to just get rid of all of those stories. And so you get this very abbreviated one God story. And then they say, and this is how it is. And if not, you're a heretic and you're going to go and we're going to pick you up, kind of like now, if you sit there and you say anything about the vaccine, bam, and it just got to where that became the status quo. And thinking outside that box and talking outside that box was heretical. And so I think that in the Western world, we have been uh, programmed to not pay attention to that. I mean, even with ghosts, they talk about. So here's a factoid for you, since you're ghosty guys. Do you know where the first written mention of a ghost is documented?
Where?
In the Epic of Gilgamesh. And Enkidu, who is Gilgamesh's buddy, is dying. and he makes this comment that he doesn't want to turn into a ghost when he dies, which suggests that there was already 3200 BC a well understood thought of ghosts.
Right. And they didn't have the history that we do where there's all these people have passed on back. I mean, there's still a lot, but not as much. So you got to think something was going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've definitely had our encounters. So I mean, I'm convinced something happens. I can't tell you what, you know. I think if we could tell you what was going on, it wouldn't be so pseudoscience-y as they want to call it, but it's
Well, we just don't
interesting.
have the instrumentation
Mhm.
to identify it.
Yeah, because it seems like it's on a different realm or a different dimension, different vibration.
Mm-hmm.
And how are we going to use something from our, you know, realm, our level, our dimension, our vibration to go higher or lower? It's probably higher is my idea, but how are
Yeah,
we going to
that's
do
my
that?
thought too. Um, but there's not really anybody investigating it either. You know, it was only been like 120 years that they developed the X-ray, but it
Mhm.
didn't mean that X-rays in general weren't floating around in the air, you know, as part of our electromagnetic spectrum. So if 200 years ago you said, oh, yeah, you know, there are these things that pass through you and it makes your body be invisible, but we can see your bones, they would look at you like you were a crackpot.
Kind of like gravity. We didn't
Yeah.
always have a name for it, but it was always there.
You know, or, you know, you get into that like Galileo and saying that the earth is not the center of the universe, you know, and he got exiled to Alba Island, you know, and Copernicus didn't publish his work until he was dying because it was heretical.
Right. So many people that you wonder what they think today. Like they've been proven right with a lot of their theories. But back in their day, they were frowned upon, exiled, like you said. I mean, just so many bad things had happened because it wasn't their thinking of the time.
Hmm. Well, you know, they're kind of in this like weird spot, you know, like the UFO people. You know, when I had my show, I mean, you know, Richard Dolan, and I mean, there's just a bunch of them, you know, and now the military has come out or the government has come out and said, oh, well, yeah, yeah, there's UFOs. Yeah, see, we have these three pictures that are military, just three, not anymore, just three. And you know, but then they make it be so subtle, and it's kind of like, so if you've been a UFO researcher your whole life and that you invested your career in that, what do you do? I don't
Right.
know.
It is kind of weird that they're like, this is for sure it. None of those else. Don't look anywhere else. You
You
know.
know, yeah, we're not going to tell you any of the secrets that we already know that, you know, but we're just going to say no because you're a conspiracy theorist and it can't be true.
I mean, what do you think happened in a New Mexican desert in 1947?
The whole
Right.
Roswell thing.
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't surprise me that something came down there. Um, you know, I mean, it seems like there is enough, there's the evidence, I mean, obviously, there's not the physical evidence anymore. Or, I mean, there's probably the physical evidence somewhere, but we just don't have access to the physical evidence, but there's a lot of cultural evidence and story evidence. But anymore, and I'm sure you guys are going to totally agree, you know, it seems like when you're hovering above the sweet spot, that's when everybody comes out and goes, no, it's wrong, no, it's bad,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
evil. And you mentioned Roswell, and it's kind of like, it's bad.
So I have a question. Have you had a UFO sighting since we're kind of on that topic still ish?
Not a
No.
one. My sister has. I'm more of a ghosty girl
Okay.
versus a UFO person.
Fair,
But
fair.
no, have not ever had a sighting. Excuse me.
Fair, fair. How about with ghost experiences?
Which one?
I mean,
So
whichever one you want to talk about.
So my most recent, so I belonged to a paranormal group years ago before it was like a really cool thing to do. But I've been sucked into a different group recently, kind of. And we did this investigation like right by my house. And it was a business. And so I go in as the group psychic. So I always want to go in cold. I don't want to hear any of the stories. I don't want to know anything. But I had heard, because they were talking really loud and they wouldn't move away from me, that glasses were being knocked off of a shelf. So that was the bit of information that I had. And so they're talking. So finally, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go outside and just sit outside while you guys do your thing. And then I start scanning the area. I'm scanning the building, I'm scanning the outside, and I'm sitting out there and I'm like, it seems like they're taking stuff off this truck and like sticking it under the building, like they're sticking it into a basement. But it was all like on the down low. And I'm like, I wonder if they were a bunch of bootleggers, because it had that kind of energy tied to it. So they finish up, I go inside. They were like, well, we're going to do upstairs first. And so I walk through the door toward the upstairs, and they're like wanting to find out something. I go, ask about the little kid, and they were like, why? I go, because it's the little kid that wants to go out the door. Go upstairs. There's like this funky energy up there. Then we take it out into the alley. That's where it got interesting. So there was a residual dead guy that was in this opening, which apparently was where they would like put the booze, was in this opening in the bottom of the building. But then there was a residual dead guy, which I was kind of tripping the team out. I'm like, yeah, there's a dead guy in there. And so to make a long story that really didn't have like any high points at that point, pull it together. What we uncovered was the building that we were investigating was a business. It was a business. It was in the downtown business area. And we weren't sure what the business was, but in the building next door, we were doing EVP and the name Jack kept coming up. Jack, Jack, Jack. And so we asked the store owner now, it's like, we just kept getting Jack, and she just was like, oh my God. So Jack apparently back in the day owned the building next door, but Jack was the bootlegger. Jack molested this woman's kid, but their influence of the alcohol and all of this stuff that was going on in this alley behind the building scared the crap out of the woman, the mother. And everything started because the business that's in there now had just started serving alcohol, and it scared her. And so she just wanted to shut it down. She didn't want alcohol being served there because of her experience dealing with Jack and the bootleggers in the alley. So it was just really kind of interesting, because usually you don't get this whole story happening. So that was really kind of cool. So
That is awesome.
Yeah, that is cool.
You talked about things getting attached to people or like a connection with it. So just in case any of our viewers go out and investigate, because I don't know, we do it, and so a bunch of people like to go and experience places. Like when we did investigations up at Third Bridge, we would see a bunch of kids over there and a lot of other weird stuff happening. But is there a way to tell, like, if something does get attached to them? Is there a way for them to like notice it before it gets out of hand?
So in my opinion, there is having something attached to you, and then there's having something go home with you, which are two different phenomena. To me, when something attached to you, it's like you opened the door and you invited it in, and you're like asking, oh, I need help, or you're doing automatic writing, and I'm going to say this out loud, or you're doing the Ouija board, but it's not that you're doing the Ouija board for fun. You're doing the Ouija board because you want to get something out of it, and you invite that presence into your life. Then it can get attached, but usually the people it attaches to are people that have really bad energy, really low energy, which is why I could see, like, if you're in the hospital, you know, and you have someone that's dying, or you're in there sick, that your energy would be so bad and you would be praying, you know, oh my God, I need help, that you could get one attached to you. But if you go to a graveyard or you go to a haunted house, it's not, you know, it's not going to be like a piece of toilet paper on the bottom of your foot. That's, you know, I mean, I've had things come home with me, you know, and it hangs out for a couple of days, but then it goes. It's not, you know, you're not dealing with this entity that's invading your space, you know. I'm going to say 99% of the time. I mean, I think that there are situations where it could happen, but not so much. You know, I
No,
think,
I agree on that one.
Hmm.
you know, if somebody is concerned, you know, there are things they can do. They can sage themselves. They can, I like using water as a cleansing tool, you know, and I'll spritz myself down, or you wash your hand and wash your face with water and use that as a cleansing ritual. I mean, that's what baptism was all about. It was a cleansing ritual to get the bad mojo off of you. You know, and so if you're concerned because you go to some place and you're like, well, maybe I need to take some extra precautions, you know, anything that is going to afford you that release of any negative energy that might be around you would be a good thing to do.
What do you think about like the cryptids like Sasquatch or like Mothman, which back to one of the things you guys were talking about where like you saw a bird, like I know some places here in the United States saw a Mothman as like a warning sign for something bad happening.
Hmm. I mean, it's not really my area of study, although I do
Okay.
live in Far East Texas, you know, so they have like one of the biggest Bigfoot conferences here, and I think it was just this past weekend, actually. I could see why how there could be very small clusters of that species around, you know, that we just haven't uncovered, you know, or discovered or whatever. Um, you know, with cities encroaching on natural areas more and more, I think they will become more, you know, if they're there, they'll become more accustomed to interacting with humanity, and we might see more encounters that way. I mean, I know that there have been a lot of people who, you know, kind of live, you know, in more rural areas, you know, and they hear stuff, or, you know, they hear stuff on their porches, but it's because we're encroaching on their land.
I mean, I know one you wanted to talk about was chakras.
Oh yes, thank you. Yeah, could you explain like the, because I know some people know about chakras, but then also there's people that want to like kind of figure out a good way to figure out their off balance. I know like taking one of your like courses or sessions would be a good option, but is
Hmm.
there one where they can like kind of pinpoint what they think is wrong and then come to you for like advice?
So that's kind of like a whole show topic right there. How's
Okay.
that? That's huge. But I'll put it in a nutshell. And I really, I mean, obviously, you know, I really suck at self promotion, but one of my books, Avoiding the Cosmic 2x4, actually talks about that very specifically, so that you can recognize from your behavior which chakras are out of balance. You know, so it's not just like talking about in a generic, you know, if you do this, but it's like, you know, it gives a lot of case studies of how that imbalance might manifest. And I finally am getting it released in ebook format, which should be in the next, well, it should show up on Amazon and all the sellers in the next week or so. I don't know. I've
Oh,
been
very
fighting
cool.
with the book people. So,
Fair. Yeah,
avoiding the
maybe.
cosmic 2x4.
Sweet. Yeah, maybe next topic we'll dive into that a little bit more, and then once that's like an ebook thing, we can like show a link to it or like different sites for
Hmm.
that. Because that was always one that I've been kind of curious about. Because I would like listen to people talk about like the different chakras, and I was always, me personally, would always like be very curious of like figuring out, diving into that. Like I have a
Hmm.
book about it, but I'm pretty bad at reading books. Like I like to listen to them more. Like I have a very I was never diagnosed with ADD, but like I definitely have like that one thing where like I see something out of the corner of my eye and I'm like, hey, what's that?
Oh, it's squirrel.
Yeah, exactly. I just get very like I can be really hyper focused about things, but then there's certain things that like when like too much stuff is going on around me, like it's hard to like focus in on that stuff.
And see, I'm kind of the opposite. If there's a lot of stuff going on around me, I can like just block it all out. But I also have 7 brothers and sisters, so you learn how to block out the noise. And so, like going to the library and having it be quiet, can't do it. Just can't do it. Need to have,
Yeah.
like some kind of something going on.
No, I can understand that. Yeah, I've always wanted to figure out a way to like block it out because I would be hanging out with friends and like we'd be like out like at a dinner place or at like the bar and like there's just too much noise going on and then, or like going on around me and I
Hmm.
feel like I can hear everybody's conversation and then like trying to listen to theirs and I'm like talking in their conversation. They were just like, I didn't even ask that. And I was just like, sorry, I heard somebody over there talking about something and I just like kind of thought we were talking about that for some reason.
Oopsie.
Yeah, no, that's something that like I don't know if I can work on, but like I've been trying to be better about that. Where like I'm engaged with somebody, I'm like trying to block out the rest of that, but it's still kind of difficult. Mainly
But
because
it
I don't
might
talk.
also be just the way that you process information.
True.
Like I'm a little dyslexic, but it's interesting because through the years I've discovered that there's a lot of people that are psychic or sensitive to energy that don't process information correctly, with dyslexia being pretty high on the list, you know. And so, it just makes you have to step outside the box and have different work with a different skill set.
Oh,
So
okay.
for me, and figuring out what that skill set or what the coping mechanism is for you. So for me, as an example, which is another thing I learned, is that people that are dyslexic have no phonics skills, like 0. And, which means you can't spell anything because you have no phonics skills because you can't sound it out. And so there could be a word and like couscous, that food couscous. I used to call it conscious. And people are like, what? And I'm like, that green stuff. And they go, you mean couscous? And it's like, well, that's how you say it?
Right.
No phonic skills. But if you say it to me, most of the time, there's sometimes it just does not sink in. Then I can sit there and go, that word equals this sound. But I don't try to, meditation and mediation, that I is just in one little different spot. It's
Right.
like, oh, it's mediation, not meditation. It's like,
Well, in English itself is so hard, even if you're sounding it out. Because I'm a dad, and I, try to help my daughter with her spelling, and words you say them phonetically, and you spell it that way, it's going to be wrong spelling wise. And
mhm.
so English is just so difficult in itself too.
I could never do French. They have like too many secret, mysterious. Throw an extra I and U in there. Yeah, no one will notice.
Yeah.
It's true.
So it is. I know because I've seen some of that. And then like you also look at like Russian because that's one that I always wanted to learn, but like opposed from like 24 letters like we have, they have like 48. I was
Hmm.
just like, man, it's difficult enough to like even get English right. So like that is going to be like a whole different level.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and especially, once we pass a certain age, our ability to easily process languages starts to decline. And so once you're an adult, it becomes really challenging unless you've been exposed to it on some level.
Hmm.
So like if you spoke Spanish or if you spoke Latin, your ability to pick up Italian or, one of the Romance languages would be easier, because there's a base to it. But
I was pretty lucky there because I'm Greek, and I'd go with my yaya out to Chicago or Indiana, and she would talk Greek with her sister, and so that I kind of was able to learn it that way, and they'd teach me words. So I was lucky in learning Greek that way, you know.
But I bet you were young too when all that was going on, or pretty young.
Yeah, definitely young enough that your brain is still a sponge. I mean, mine. I feel like I can still learn things, but I've definitely got to that point where I retain it, but for how long, you know?
Feel that.
Right.
And after that little accident spill out, Dave, I know that like, my retaining thing has gone a whole lot downhill.
Well, and so you were talking about different herbs and stuff for like ways to make you feel better. Obviously, we're in cold season. Is there anything that people could do right now that you'd recommend?
Wow, that was a jump. Well, okay.
I didn't know Sam had any more, so I was like, I'll take it this way.
So I started doing a live stream called Thursday Night Live with Dr. Rita Louise. And, so for anyone that's listening, if you go on YouTube under Just Energy Radio, you can hit the live stream there. Or if you join my Facebook group, Dr. Rita Louise Live, you can access it there. With that said, I did a show because I do like a 15-minute monologue, and then I open it up for people to ask questions and get readings and whatever. On COVID, because I had long COVID and did this cleansing protocol, which was wonderful, and I feel so much better. But there was also recommendations for like COVID prevention, but really what they recommended, and I'm going to skip off the more specialized ones, were things that they just recommend in general to keep your immune system in good shape, but if you're concerned about COVID, I would maybe take it a little more seriously. And instead of just doing maybe one thing, do all of these things, but vitamin C, vitamin D, and zinc. Those are the three biggies that you would want to do to keep your immune system up and running and ward off cold and infection. But it also is a good COVID preventer.
Right.
And I know for a long time we've done oil of oregano too. It burns though. It burns. I won't.
See, I get the capsules of that because, so if anybody has ever taken the liquid oil of oregano, they tell you to take like 2 drops and put it under your tongue, which if you took all of the oregano off of a New York style pizza and put it under your tongue, that's what it's like. It's just overwhelming. So when I would do that, I would like take like a half a shot of water and put it in a glass and put my drops in it and then chug it down. But they have it in a gel cap, and I have moved to that because, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, oil of oregano is great. And if you think you're getting sick, that is definitely like the go-to antibacterial, antimicrobial, antifungal, anti stuff to kill whatever's going on.
Yeah. No, I agree there. It was. Sam, before I go in any other weird directions, do you have any more questions you'd like to talk about?
Yes, but not for this episode. It'll probably be another one.
Okay. Well, one, because I was listening to some podcasts that you were on or different shows too, besides just reading the book. But you were talking about one with like relationships, right? And the more you described it, I was like, oh, that sounds really familiar because you were talking about somebody that gives you all this attention. And then once you get somewhere, like I did, I got a townhouse with this person after, I thought she,
Once
was
you're
really into me.
trapped,
Yeah,
basically, once you're
and then
trapped.
it flipped. Yeah. And so
Hmm.
I didn't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that because that did resonate with me at
That's
least.
a whole show right there too. So
Hey, we,
that's a
hey,
whole book.
yeah.
But
Do you want to give them just a little
sure, I
sneak peek
sure
at a
will.
future one then maybe?
And actually, I'm going to share that with a story. Okay, so I have a terrible relationship history. I've been married too many times. I've lived with too many guys, and the majority of them were not very good. But I don't really feel that bad because husband number four, who did die, so I don't really feel, and he was like really good, and I would keep him because he didn't change. I was number six for him. So he was number four for me. I was number six for him. And this was his story. So we had been married for about a month. And he looked at me and said, "Well, I'm waiting." And I said, "Waiting for what?" And he goes, "Waiting for you to change." And I'm like, "What do you mean change?" It's like, this is it, like maybe I won't like put so much makeup on, or, I'll wear a t-shirt to bed, but I'm a one size fits all kind of gal. And I go, "Why are you asking me that?" And he said, "Because wives one through five, once they said I do, they changed." And so if you're in a relationship with someone who's a narcissist or who has narcissistic tendencies, they tend to, the technical term is love bomb you and make you feel like you're the most important person in the world until they get you trapped. And what I mean trapped is, if you're a woman, they get you pregnant, you move into a house together. My last boyfriend, Mr. I'm not going to mention his name in case you're listening, Mrs. You know who I'm talking about, wife. Sorry, had to say that because I have a stalker. My ex-husband's new wife has been stalking me, so that's for you. Anyway, um, we bought a boat together. But there's always something to keep you connected to them and that you're invested in the relationship. And that's when they start to change. You know, Husband number three, I bought us a house for him and his kids. And then once we moved into the house, boom, changed. Boom. It was like, yeah, they do that. Whole show. Got a lot of material. Got a lot of stories.
I mean, I probably could share some of my own because
I'm
I know
sure.
my buddies are like, before you date again, we're gonna sit down, do an interview process. Like,
Yeah.
But I have to tell you. So, I mean, I have a lot of girlfriends who have been in very similar situations. And so I'm like, we need to start the dumb girl club because we just like do dumb stuff and get in relationships with not good persons. So you could be an honorary member of the dumb girl club. We would let you in because you qualify. Um,
I've definitely done dumb stuff. So,
Well, you don't think it's dumb until after, and then it's like, oh, but like the last one, he who shall not be named. Sorry, I got in trouble for saying his name on air. And anyway, um, I took him around all of my friends and I looked at them all before he came around. I said, "I'm bringing him around. I want you to give me your opinion because if you sit there a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, and say to me, 'Well, I never really liked him,' I'm going to hate your guts. So this is your chance." And he still turned out to be a jerk, loser, nasty person that won't be named. But if you get my book, you'll find out what it is.
well, hey, maybe we
Oops.
can do that show
Can't
around
change it.
Valentine's Day, right?
Well, that's when I released the book that I'm talking about is The Dysfunctional Dance of the Empath and Narcissist. And I did release it on Valentine's Day. So it
There
would be
you
a perfect show.
Well, there you go. We got
Yep,
two
yep.
shows we can do. I mean, this has been fun. I know we've had an hour already, but we'll definitely have to do this again because I've enjoyed
Okay.
it. I hope you've enjoyed it as well.
I have enjoyed it. I mean,
Yeah.
I started coughing, and Although, Sam, you need to come up with some questions. You're just like chilling back there.
I mean, yeah, no, I do have questions. It's just
I'm just going to
sometimes
leave you
they
reserved
escape
for
me.
the Stropper show. Okay.
Yeah, well, for a different show, but then sometimes they some of them I don't write down because I'm listening to like some of your podcasts and other stuff at work, and I'm like, I should ask that, and then like if I don't like jot it down then because like I'm in the middle of something, it just gets lost, and then sometimes it'll come back, but it is kind of my fault. I am working on that as well, trying to get that better because like I do have like a bunch of questions, and it's either like sometimes the guests like answer them already, or like me and Keaton have the same questions because usually we kind of like are on like the same like kind of thought pattern when we like
Mm-hmm.
talk to certain guests. So it's just like, well, he already covered that one. Maybe I could ask it differently, but then they'd just be asking blah, 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 answering the same thing. But no,
Maybe,
yeah, it
maybe
is.
not.
Maybe not. I don't know. Hard to say.
I
But
mean, the
yeah, no.
UFO congressional hearing asked like the same question like a gazillion times, so I'm sure it wouldn't
Yes, they
hurt.
did.
Well, at
Yes, they
least it
did.
would
But
be a
like,
question, not, do you have a book? What's the
right.
name? Well, can you
What's
tell us a little about it? Like,
true? True.
Yeah, we've done some interviews ourselves, and we've had some of those experiences where they're just like they invite us on, but then they have like no idea about anything we've done.
mm-hmm.
And so I've always tried to do my research and try to make sure we can ask
And it
good questions.
shows, and I can tell, and I
Awesome.
appreciate it. And you actually at least read the beginning of the book. And I'm like, dang, he actually read it.
Not I took lots of notes from it, and then like Sam said, some of them you brought up, so I was like, no, we already kind of talked about it, but like, yeah, I just you can't see because it's
It's so
like,
bright.
yeah, I was just writing a bunch from podcasts, from your book, and no, yeah, I found the book very entertaining and very interesting. So everyone that's listening, you should go read it. And before you leave, where can people find your book, your
Okay.
podcast, everything? I know we've
So
talked
the
about it a
one
little.
that we talked about primarily is E.T. Chronicles, What Myth and Legends Have to Say About Human Origins. And that's available Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I mean, all of your major publishers. All of my books, minus Avoiding the Cosmic 2x4, are available pretty much on all the publishers. I self-published Avoiding the Cosmic 2x4, and I have a closet full of them. And then Amazon is Amazon, which is why I wanted to get the ebook out. So that will be out. I think the official you can buy it by date is right before Thanksgiving. I don't know. I'd have to look it up because I just did that today. So, but then, yeah, all my books, if you just look me up, you'll find, because there's The Power Within, Avoiding the Cosmic 2x4, Dark Angels, An Insider's Guide to Ghost Spirits and Attached Entities, E.T. Chronicles, Stepping Out of Eden, and my latest, The Dysfunctional Dance of the Empath and Narcissist. And then in the beginning of the year, I'm going to be releasing a new book that the title is Dang, It Was Me All Along. You'll love that book, Keegan. It's the Dumb Girl Club book.
All right.
Oh,
Yeah, no.
soulhealer.com. Go to soulhealer.com. That's my webpage. If you want to drop me a note, schedule a private consultation. If you want to check out the live stream, it's Thursday night at 7 p.m. Central. You can access it on YouTube by going to Just Energy Radio on YouTube. So all one word, Just Energy Radio, and hit the live stream. Of course, subscribe to the channel, like the channel, and hit the notification button. And then on Facebook, it's Dr. Rita Louise Live is the group. And join the group because I post weird stuff. So somebody posted this picture. I'll share this with you. And it was like a coffee table, like a block of ice. And inside the coffee table was like, it was your mom. You can keep your mom with you forever. And mom's like just
Oh,
laying
yeah, I
in this
saw that.
block of ice. So of course I shared it, and all these like comments. And so, if you join the group, you get to like see all kinds of weird crap that I think is pretty funny, personally.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, we're excited. We're thank you for joining. It sounds like definitely could do a follow-up show, probably two, maybe three or four. Who knows? Because
Mhm.
you do so many topics. So we'll
Well,
definitely have to have you back
I
on.
love doing shows, which is why, I mean, I had a podcast for 10 years and I just was like, I just don't want to do the interview format anymore. It was just a lot of work. And so I came up with this idea and I love it. I mean, I love being on the air and just brr, 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 and I have a lot of fun. And this personality comes out in the live. So I never know what I'm gonna say while I'm on air. So it's fun.
Yeah. No, I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much again. And
Well, thank you, both of you, for having me.
yeah,
Yeah,
no,
no
thank
problem.
you. And I'll make sure to put all the links in the description below for anyone. And you have a
Perfect.
wonderful evening, and we'll definitely connect in the future.
Okay,
Yeah,
sounds
and
great.
I'll have more questions for you
All
next
right.
time.
Okay, sounds perfect.
Once again, Sam and I want to give a big thank you to Dr. Rita Louise for joining us tonight. Make sure to go support her and check out all her work. Promise you guys will not be disappointed, and we'll definitely be doing some follow-up shows in the future. I think we've teased a couple within this episode. But until next time, for more Culz interviews, click that link to your left. For more about what we're doing here at Culz Paranormal, click that link to your right. And don't forget to hit that like and give us a subscribe. And let us know, is there any questions you'd like us to ask Rita when she returns to Culz interviews?